Thanks, Miguel. Yeah, and a big thank you to you and Fran and your whole team for putting this thing together in record time. It's amazing what you've achieved. So thank you for the invitation. I originally prepared this talk for a different conference, which was supposed to happen in the real world, not this virtual world, a few weeks ago. It was an education conference. And I delivered it as a webinar a few days ago. And it just seemed very relevant for this topic because it was all around future-proofing our youth, how in this completely uncertain world that we're living in, how do we prepare our children and our youth with the right foundation, the right reflexes to be able to handle these situations. So the talk, when it was first done, is probably more relevant now than ever. So I want to take, whilst it was for an education conference, I want to take a fairly broad view. It's really about what we learn, what we should be getting our young people to learn, how we learn, and when we learn. And a lot of the prompt for this was, and I'll come back to it shortly. I don't know the degree to which in your different countries the phrase of the fourth industrial revolution is sort of current. It was a phrase coined by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. And certainly in South Africa and a lot of emerging economies, it's been a driving narrative recently about what are the skills that we need for this fourth industrial revolution. And that technology and technological skills were the answer to everything. So for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to argue that as important as technology is, it's simply and will always only be an enabler of things, and that really the skills that our children and our youth will need in a world where unpredictable things like coronavirus will probably continue to happen with more regularity. Let's hope not, but we have to assume that they will. That the skills they need are the fundamentally human skills that we've seen emerging in abundance over the last few weeks across the world as we deal with this pandemic. So skills like empathy, compassion, creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and importantly, a sense of community, a sense that, and the irony of the situation where we're all so isolated physically, and yet spiritually and collectively, we probably feel more connected than we have done for a long time. And those kind of skills, typically in the English-speaking world, are labeled as soft skills, somehow not important, just soft. And I want to argue that there's nothing soft about them. They are the most essential human skills and the essential skills that our young people need to navigate this future. And so the problem that I have with the fourth industrial revolution terminology, firstly, it's the whole narrative is that the only thing our kids need to learn is coding and algorithms. We need data scientists. But the problem with the fourth industrial revolution is that education is not an industrial process. It's a human process, and it's a human system for preparing people for life. Yes, it's to help people get jobs and be economically active, but more than anything else, it's about preparing people for life, and with all its unpredictability, all its unexplained tragedies, but all its wonder, all of the things that make human existence what it is. And so if we only focus on the technology side, we've already seen the direct result of what happens when we just let data scientists go rampant, where if we just worship at the altar of technological advancement, when you put the power of big data in the hands of people with no value systems. So people like Cambridge Analytica, people like the Kremlin, people like maybe, let's not say the Republican Party, but the people who managed to get Donald Trump elected. Those are the people who've manipulated that data, who are building those big data algorithms that abuse personal data and manipulate the world. And if we're putting the power of that big data in people with no value system, then we're in trouble. And I think, and please, this isn't, there is absolutely a role for technology, but I just think sometimes we spend too much time discovering what can be done and how powerful technology can be, but not enough time spent considering whether it should be done, whether it's the right thing to do, and how to apply the power of that big data. So I think that's the thing. It's immensely powerful, and if it can be turned to a force for good, then great. But how do we know what is good without a good value system? So for that, how do we build that value system? How do we strengthen those human reflexes that we're now seeing emerge in this world in the midst of this crisis? And the point being, and I'll come on in a little bit to explain a little bit about my context and the work that I do and my business does. But really it's premised on the fact that if we want to strengthen our brains, then we study. If we want to strengthen our bodies, then we work out, we go to the gym. But how do we strengthen our human value system? How do we strengthen our spirit? And again, that's something I'm going to touch on a little bit later. In most cultures, traditionally, it was the parents' job or the extended family's job to inculcate those values into young people. But now around the world, that traditional nuclear family is very much in the minority, and there's no guarantee that our kids are going to somehow soak up those values through osmosis like we were supposed to. And in the educational context, we're given a little bit of a window into those human things. So, empathy, dignity, honesty, compassion. We're given that window through what academically is called, ironically, the humanities, or not ironically, it is called the humanities. And that's arts, literature, history, language. And so humanities supposedly is there. Now I have two daughters, both at university, here at Stellenbosch University here in Cape Town. And when people ask, what are your girls studying at university? So I said, well, I've got one daughter who's doing a BSc, so a Bachelor of Science degree in Human Life Sciences. And they go, wow, that's good. And then I say, and my other daughter is doing a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities, studying English and social anthropology. And the reaction to that is always, oh, that's nice, as though it's not serious, as though it's not real. And it's called humanities. What could possibly be more important than teaching people about humanity, about how to be better human beings? The challenge, as always, is how we do it. And we're still, in a lot of cultures, and particularly the English language countries, we're still teaching the complexities of human existence, of human emotions, of family struggles, pride, vanity, dignity, bravery, by studying Shakespeare, who's nearly 500 years old. And surely there has to be a better way of bringing about those outcomes, how we can be far more aware of those human values and start to develop those human muscles. So is there anybody out there teaching people in a different way? And so I'm just going to share my screen now. Hold on 1 second. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So this is a picture of a classroom in Denmark. And I don't know if there are people from Denmark on the call. So I hope what I'm sharing mirrors your experience. So the Danish education system has empathy as a set subject in their daily and weekly curriculum, because they've worked out that kids, and this, I believe it's from the age of 7, pretty much all the way through high school, they've worked out that kids who have the ability to empathize are less likely to bully others, and less likely to base their own success, and they're also more focused on the collective goal than their own individual goals. So it also builds a sense of community. I hope, yeah, sorry, I hope my internet is okay. So in this empathy class, what they do, they'll choose a student, a learner, to share a problem that they're going through. You know, something, it might be any problem that they're dealing with, either at home or in their life in general. And the kids discuss it and try and put themselves in the other child's situation, and discuss problems and discuss solutions around what they would do in that situation, and offer constructive advice without any judgment. So they learn empathy by being empathetic. So they learn by doing, and that's something we're going to come on to a little bit later on. And in the event that there are no problems to discuss, which might happen, then the children come together to enjoy. And again, if there's Danish or Scandinavian people on the line, I apologize for my pronunciation, but I believe it's called hege, which is a concept sort of culturally specific to Denmark, which means intentionally created intimacy. So they literally bring kids together. They force them to connect on a human level. They also practice collaborative learning, where students of different strengths and weaknesses with different skills come together on tasks where all of those varied skills are needed. And what it does is it helps them understand the value of teamwork, of respecting other people's strengths. And it helps students realize how helping each other can actually lead to better results for everybody. So again, a sense of community. And it's something, if there are people from Africa on the call, that there's a fundamental philosophy that is at the heart of African culture, which is Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. So it means that I cannot achieve anything or fulfill my own purpose without it being fully part of my community's mission and purpose at the same time. Now, some of these exercises, they don't seem particularly radical or new or innovative. And they're the kind of things that we've all probably done as what we call team building exercises, either in a corporate environment or whatever, or at school. We'll do them occasionally, but usually on a school camp, on sort of special occasions, but my question is, why are they not a regular part of the curriculum? Why are they not a regular respected part of the curriculum? And not just empathy, but some of those other skills like critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, as we've touched on. So why can't we reinvent humanities? If humanities is a category of academic subjects, why can't we repackage it and reinvent it and redeploy it as a meaningful part of the curriculum to help young people develop these skills? In South Africa, it's mandatory for high school learners up until you graduate high school to study what's called life orientation. And having had 2 daughters who've gone through that process, it's an educational black hole. They teach basic things like how to write a CV, and it's just it's content that can be learned so easily elsewhere online. But in a human environment, a learning environment, the opportunity to develop some of those human spirit muscles that I'm talking about is just being missed. So why can't we do that? So what I wanted to share is just a thought at this stage in the presentation of what a curriculum could look like that balances those technical skills and those important skills that, yes, we need to teach, and particularly around coding, with the more human skills. So here's my first, whoops, sorry. So if you can imagine, if you had to balance an education and curriculum, so for every hour you spend teaching coding, why can't you spend an hour teaching compassion? For every hour spent teaching algorithms, let's spend an hour teaching altruism, an hour on equations, but an hour on equality, particularly in countries where, like most countries around the world, where the disparity between rich and poor is growing by the day. So yes, we can teach them the SQL programming language, but we should be developing their EQ at the same time. We can teach them the C++ programming language, but let's teach them critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and compassion as a critical output. So you might be saying, well, that's all well and good, and yes, it's great to develop these skills, but how's that going to help me get a job? You know, you can't get a job as an empathizer. You know, you can't be vice president of empathy. And maybe you can. Maybe if you think just 5-10 years ago, you know, now so many corporations have a role that is director of diversity and inclusion. A lot of more forward-thinking companies now have chief purpose officer. And one of the fastest growing professional disciplines across so many different industries is human-centered design or design thinking. And those of you, I'm sure there are a lot of you on the call right now, you know, you know the process, and empathy is an absolutely essential skill and an integral part of the process. So empathy is as vital a business skill as coding. So what I want to do now is introduce you to an amazing group of people that I've had the privilege of working with, who actually get to make a career out of those 5 C's and other human values, and make a living out of it. Who also exercise on a daily basis the kind of essential skills of resilience and resourcefulness, all the things that we spend so much time trying to bring about. And these are a group of, you can call them social entrepreneurs, we call them impact entrepreneurs. And they were a group of individuals who I've worked with for the last 5 or 6 years. This was a program that I helped develop and then ran for Red Bull around the world, which was aimed at enabling these community change makers. So social entrepreneurs, but very much at an early stage, and people who were in the communities where the problems existed. And a key part of the philosophy that we've always tried to apply is that the people closest to the problem should be the people closest to the solution. And what we've done as part of the program, it was not a standard accelerator program where we just look at revenue models and impact models and organizational strategies and try and get the organization to scale. What we've focused on primarily is how do you build the capacity to scale into the entrepreneur themselves? So how do you develop their capacities? How do you build their human reflexes? How do you develop their collaboration skills, their critical thinking skills, their ability to empathize? These are all very much purpose-driven individuals. But what we've seen by various methodologies, by bringing themselves together, by creating certain environments, that all of a sudden those human muscles start to flex. And they feel it flexing. So I just want to introduce you to a couple of them and tell you just by way of example, and then we'll chat a little bit more about how we work with them. This is a gentleman called Murindo Fumo here in South Africa. And he is a trained engineer. And the thing with a lot of the projects we're working with, there's absolutely a technology component, but the technology is the enabler and humanity is the outcome. So Murundeni he's a trained engineer, a trained water engineer. And in South Africa, like in many developing economies, we have huge problems in getting clean water to a lot of the under-resourced communities. So there are people in township communities and informal settlements who have to walk for 20 minutes to get to a standpipe to be able to fill a bucket to go home. So what he's developed is a mobile, solar-powered water filtration system. And innovatively, it uses charcoal from macadamia nutshells as the primary filtering mechanism. And this can be installed in any water source. It can be salinate, so it can be seawater, so it's a desalination system. It can take pretty much 99.9% of any form of polluted water and convert it into clean drinking water. So his challenge in his role now, he's got that technical knowledge as the enabler, but it's now collaborating with the communities, working in interesting creative ways as to how to let the communities take ownership of these, but all fundamentally driven by his own sense of humanity and his own compassion for those communities. This is a remarkable woman called Brittany Young, who's from Baltimore in the US. Baltimore is a tough city. And one of the things that the marginalized youth in Baltimore have always held on to is a culture of riding dirt bikes. And it's always been a point of friction between the young riders of dirt bikes and the authorities, because the authorities always saw this as a vaguely sort of suspect, illegal thing. And there's always been big tension in the community of Baltimore around this. And what Brittany has done, and again, she's a trained scientist. She actually was an intern at NASA for a while. She's now using the youth's passion for dirt bikes as a way of teaching them STEM skills. So how you maintain your engine, how brakes work. She's using that to build a passion and an interest for science skills. So again, technology is at the heart of it, but what her driving force is to give those young kids in those communities in East and West Baltimore, which are hard communities with very little resources and very little opportunity for success. And she's really giving them a chance to make something of themselves and their community. This is a guy called Untitled Chapter from Soweto in South Africa. And in South Africa, you'll see the shack behind him, the corrugated metal shack. In so many communities in the townships, you'll have formal structures like the one that you can see on the side. So you'll have a properly built house, but the only way that the owners of that house can make revenue is by leasing out their backyard to somebody to build a shack and live there. So they do that for a few dollars a month. Now, the problem with this is, firstly, from a health and sanitation point of view, the shack dwellers struggle. From a health and safety point of view, if ever a fire breaks out because of the density of the housing, there's a huge fire risk. So what Untitled has done is found a way to convert these shacks into formal housing, but the clever way is how it's funded. So he'll go to the homeowner and say, okay, will you accept a little bit less rent for the next 2 years in return for having a properly built structure that will be backed onto your house, that will add value to your property. And then what he says to the shack dweller is, will you pay a little bit more rent for the next 2 years in return for having a proper house with water and electricity? And he structures a very informal but mutually binding agreement that allows him to access cash. He buys the building materials, builds the houses on credit, and then for the next 2 years, both the tenant and the owner are paying him back. So it's a very simple methodology. So again, no real technology, but all driven by a sense of community. This is a young guy from the Free State, which is a central area in South Africa. His name's Mbangiso Mabaso. And he's developed, again, simple technology, or what a lot of us would take as simple technology, which is augmented reality, where now in schools, he allows kids to access learning, again, through technology, but what it enables them to do is bring the world of education to life. So by scanning either a smartphone or a tablet over this cube with a simple augmented reality code, he can bring to life in 3 dimensions parts of the body. And the point is to bring about that sense of wonder in the kids. And yes, it might want them to lead on to developing careers in technology, but it's about opening their minds, giving them that sense of wonder. And then finally, the last example I want to give, which is an idea which right now is saving lives in many ways. This is a guy called Neo Hitiri, who a few years ago was diagnosed with tuberculosis, like a lot of people in South African communities. And so he was prescribed regular chronic medication to treat his condition. Now, the problem with receiving chronic medication in the South African context is you have to go to a clinic. And the queues at that clinic, it can take you 3 to 4 hours to be able to collect your chronic medication. And those queues are heavily, densely packed in the clinics. So what he did was develop a system, and the squares behind him are electronic lockers. So you as a patient will receive a text message saying your medication is ready for collection. And you come to the clinic, but instead of going inside the clinic, you go to the wall outside the clinic and key in the code that was sent to you in your SMS. And that opens a locker where your specific medication has been preloaded by one of the clinic staff. And he's reduced the waiting time of delivering chronic medication from 4 hours down to 22 seconds. And you can imagine in a time that we're going through right now, where you still have to deliver that critical medical care, but do it in a world of social distancing, that this is really an idea whose time has come. So again, it came from his desire to help people because of his level of empathy for the community and people with his condition, that's what's driven him to develop this solution. So these are people who, again, applying technology, but the fundamental driving force and the skills that they're using on a daily basis are those skills. And what we try to do is develop not just their business skills to help them scale their business, but work with them on developing those human muscles. So the program, I didn't quite explain, the program I ran was part of Red Bull for the last 6 years. But as of the beginning of this year, with Red Bull's blessing and some funding, we've now spun this off into an independent venture called Further, and hence the business that I'm doing. So we're now carrying forward this amazing group of individuals and trying to grow the fellowship of fellows that we have, and also bring on board new partners and new funders to help us be able to continue the journey. And a lot of the learning for those, I'm sure there are some entrepreneurs in the audience at the moment. There's only so much you can teach people about entrepreneurship. You have to basically learn by doing. You become an entrepreneur. You learn how to become an entrepreneur by being an entrepreneur, and the challenges that it comes with, the need for absolute resilience, the need to be able to collaborate, to think critically about situations, to tell stories. And so like those Danish empathy classes where you learn by doing, you're not academically understanding what it is, but you're empirically and viscerally experiencing what it feels like. And this is the point that I was mentioning, that where my belief and my opinion as to how human beings develop has been fundamentally changed over the last 5 to 6 years. That we've learned how to build the body, to train our physical muscles. We've learned how to develop the mind and flex our mental muscles. But I really believe now we're at a point in humanity's development that we are able to develop those human muscles and develop the human spirit. And this is where it comes to the situation we're in now, because it may be that, you know, being a social entrepreneur, an impact entrepreneur, is not for everybody. It's a tough life, and people are, so in terms of how we're educating and future-proofing our youth, some of them may say, but I just want a job in a corporation, in an organization. But you just have to look at what's happening right now, that all of a sudden corporations are feeling those human muscles flex again. That sense of humanity is emerging. So where you've got alcohol companies, luxury perfume companies converting their machinery to make hand sanitizer. You've got vacuum cleaner companies, General Electric, lots of machinery companies making ventilators. You've got fabric companies, all sorts of people making masks, and not just to try to keep their businesses going, but because it's the right thing to do. And all of a sudden now, not only as much as it's the economic situation is crippling, all of a sudden the employees of those companies are feeling inspired, feeling proud to be working at that company. The consumers and the customers of those companies are now feeling, well, actually, this is a company that I'm proud to do business with. And that's that human spirit. That's that fundamental sense of human spirit. All of a sudden, those muscles are twitching for those corporations, and it feels good. And importantly, and why as challenging as this situation is, why I believe some real silver linings are going to emerge, is that once that genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. No company is going to say, okay, we did this for a while. Yes, we're going to go back to making our products, our traditional products, because we need to make money, but we want to continue to find ways as to how we can be a good citizen, how we can play a role in our community. I saw a headline of an article in the Harvard Business Review recently that said, "Coronavirus, a time to lead with purpose and humanity." And I thought, isn't it always a time to lead with purpose and humanity? Does that mean that after the coronavirus situation has settled, that you're going to stop leading with purpose and humanity? Well, I don't think anybody's going to let you do that. Certainly not your employees, certainly not your customers. Because I think companies and purpose-driven companies have been around for a while. You know, we always use Patagonia as the perfect example of a values-driven, purpose-driven company. But they've always been the sort of the early adopters. And now I think what we're going to see coming out of this is it's going to hit that tipping point where it's going to tip into the mainstream. And why is it going to do that? Because the leaders of those organizations will see that doing good engages and inspires their employees. It drives innovation in the business. It cuts across siloed departments. And in future, consumers are going to want to buy from companies like that. And already we know that millennials are very vocal about, you know, I'm only going to buy from ethical brands, but millennials did a lot of talking or do a lot of talking, but not a lot of walking. However, Gen Z or Gen Z, following hot on their heels, those are the people who are going to walk somewhere else if they don't believe the brand that they're dealing with or the company that they're dealing with is doing good as part of its daily operations. And that's the challenge. You know, businesses in the past would do well first, so they'd make their money first and then do good afterwards. They'd write out a check to make themselves feel better. So the doing good was more about the redemption of the business than it was about the empowerment of the receiver. But now companies are going to have to work out that they've got to fundamentally do good as part of their daily operation, and that you will do well by doing good. So you do good first and do well at the same time. Importantly, in terms of going back to our youth and how we've prepared them, it is going to be the employees who have those reflexes, who have the EQ, who have that strong capacity for empathy, who have that agility of adapting to challenging situations, creativity, collaboration, a sense of their role in the community, those are going to be the most valuable and the most valued employees. And yes, there will still be somewhere in the corner of the building a data scientist, but the majority of the employees there are going to be recruited, yes, for a technical skill, but because of how they can adapt to these situations and apply those human skills. However, sorry, let me just check the time. I've got about 2 minutes to go, and then we can get into the questions. In South Africa and a lot of other developing economies, the challenges are not in the corporate corridors. They're out in the communities where there's massive unemployment, crippling poverty, and increasingly a lack of despair and hope, and particularly at the moment where there are so many communities in India and in South Africa with this lockdown, they're far more concerned around dying of starvation than they are dying of COVID-19. And there are so many kids there who've been failed by the education system. And they believe they've developed that mindset that, and it's if those of you know the psychological term of the locus of control, that the locus of control for their lives is external. The world is happening to them. And yet there are so many people there with amazing skills of their own lived experience, who, if we can help shift that locus of control from external to internal, so that they then think, actually, I can do this, then we can hopefully build a new generation of young leaders that can find the solutions, like the examples of the entrepreneurs I shared with you. So what we've tried to do is develop a learning framework for that process. And it's all centered around the concept, and again, the psychologists amongst you will recognize the concept of self-efficacy. So it is that point where the locus of control is inside you, and you know that you can do whatever the world throws at you. And I won't go through the other things in detail, but these are the kind of cogs in the machine that if you can get all of those cogs working at the right time and together, then really you can build, I say build, you can help empower or enable these young people to be self-effective leaders who have a clear idea of how they're going to develop themselves in the community. So what are they going to do in the community, but importantly, what are they going to do for their community? And really what that brings up is that sense that I am enough. So they don't suffer from the imposter syndrome anymore. That actually whatever life throws at you, as tough and crippling as this situation is, I've got the ability in me to do something about it. So really that's our mission, is further beyond just developing this pipeline of impact entrepreneurs. We really want to try and bring about this sort of future-proofing of our youth by literally building stronger human beings who build stronger communities. And as a final thought, sorry, it's longer than 2 minutes, but this is the last minute. Obviously, I've spoken a lot today about purpose and human beings having that purpose. And often people, the people are saying, well, how can I marry making money? How can I marry doing what I love, but doing something in a way that it has a higher level purpose? And it's a simple framework, and I'm sure a lot of you, those of you familiar with the Japanese concept of ikigai, would know this. And I'm just going to leave it as a system of thinking where if you, as a young person, if we can help bring about these things, that you focus on what you love, what you're good at or great at, what you can get paid for, but importantly, what does the world need? Then it can unlock your passion. It can create a profession for you. You can have your vocation, your mission, but more than anything else in the middle, then that can deliver your purpose. So really, if we can, to recap, if we can just build on some of this amazing humanity that is being shown at the moment, but instead of it only coming out in crises, if we can find a way to lock it into the development at primary school, at secondary school, in tertiary education, and in lifelong learning, where we learn how to flex those human muscles, then maybe the world that we're heading into is a little bit better than the world we had before this situation. So thanks for that. My details are there. We'll jump onto some questions now. But please contact me on that email, and you can follow us on our social channels there. Okay, so I'm going to jump into, I don't know if the questions have been mainly in the chat or the Q&A, but let's have a quick look at the Q&A. How to train, yeah. So one of the questions is, I like the focus on these soft skills, how to train the trainers though? And that's a really good question. And we don't have all the answers on this, but I think what we've learned, the whole principle of learning by doing, so much of the value that our, sorry, I'm getting a signal that my connection is unstable. I hope it's okay. So much of the development that we do in our programs does not come from supposed experts talking down to these people, or as in a sort of teacher-learner process. So much of it is peer-to-peer. So the people who've gone through the journey, who've been through some of the programs that we've done, who've learned the hard way around the journey of an entrepreneur, that they then make the best trainers. So it's a kind of human academy process. So as we develop one set of leaders, those leaders then share their experience on a peer-to-peer level and then train the next generation. So it isn't like a curriculum and a playbook, whilst there are tools that we use and some really interesting ones that we've hacked from the world of high performance, that ultimately it's a process, and people learn these human reflexes from each other. I hope that answered that. What would you suggest we do to maintain the positive human good aspects of the current situation, or will it just fade away? Great question. I would like to think, as I say, humanity feels good. Doing these things feels good. It actually literally releases oxytocin, which is a neurochemical inside us. That's why we feel good doing these things. And it becomes an addictive thing. And I think it is generally up to every individual, whether they're an employee, a small business. And I realize that people's first priority is literally to make it through the end of the month, to put food on the table. But I honestly believe that it is not going to be what necessarily people do, but how we do it, that everything we do, the way we engage with our customers and consumers, is going to be driven by that sense of what do they need? How can we help? So I don't know how to, other than hopefully that people have enough self-reflection, and maybe forums like this, as influential, future-focused people, we can be the disciples of this new way of doing. But I do think, as I said, and I've worked in this world of corporate purpose and business purpose for many years now, if you know that diffusion of innovation curve that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, where purpose-driven companies were at the beginning of the curve, it's now, I think, going to tip where, unless you are doing that, and it's got to go beyond what was traditionally corporate social responsibility, to fundamentally doing good on a daily basis. Do you think the group size matters when teaching skills such as compassion and empathy? It depends. There are different techniques that we use. Some of them you need big groups, but there's a great technique, and a lot of this is out there and available. All we've done is try and curate it into a program. But some of the best in terms of empathy is one-on-one, and I think it's called the 36 questions of love. And it's not a sort of dating game, but they're questions, and it was developed by some psychologists in the UK. They're questions that two people sit, and it's like a card game, and you read this question, and the questions get progressively more revealing. And literally, it's an exercise where by the end of that, there's such a fundamental human connection between those two people. So it can be a very intimate thing between two people, or it can be certain group exercises. So I hope that answered that. How can we use these humanity skills to empower youth to take actions to combat climate change? A lot of the, sorry, I was muttering there. Yeah, how can we empower the youth to take actions to combat climate change? So many of the projects that we work with have an environmental benefit. You know, we've got guys running eco-brick programs. We've got a lot of work around renewable energy. And again, what it is, and there's always a technology part to it, but it's what keeps that individual, what keeps them getting out of bed every morning, that keeps them going through tough times where the funding that they were promised doesn't arrive, that the community they were working with suddenly seem that they don't want to do this, that need for constant resilience and resourcefulness is always evident. And so no matter what problem you're tackling, and obviously our guys work across all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, that absolutely there are enough, and let's not call them eco-warriors, but people out there who are determined to make, whether it's a systemic change or even just a localized change for the benefit of the environment. And they're going to need these skills. So it's not, the how we do it, again, we've got some ideas on that, but absolutely these skills can be applied to the benefit of the planet. So a question here from an anonymous attendee. I work in the field of countering violent extremism. How can we apply human values, the very things you talked about, when a country community is polarized by toxic nationalism, religious politics, etc.? When a country has been indoctrinated to hate. Wow. I suppose, yeah, that is the challenge. But all I would say is probably one human being at a time. You're not going to change those, let's call it for what it is, those psychotic movements. You're not going to change them on a group level because it's the group dynamic that's created them in the first place. But if you can literally isolate them one at a time and try and find other ways of promoting understanding, and it's the way humanity has always moved, where one tribe gets dominated by another tribe. And I think if the tribe of good people is bigger than the tribe of bad people, then hopefully that will have something. But yeah, I think I could retire if I could answer that question. Do you feel that some corporations, some corporations are promoting values such as compassion just on paper? Can corporations truly incorporate social values? I think the answer to that is yes and yes. There are definitely some companies who talk a good game. I remember a couple of years ago, I was in California at the time of the Super Bowl. And as you know, the Super Bowl has, every brand wants to have its TV commercial shown in the Super Bowl. And every ad in that Super Bowl 2 years ago was something about how this company is doing something for the good of the community or whatever. And when you dig a little deeper, they probably spent more money on making the TV commercial than they did on what actually they're doing good. So there's a lot of lip service paid to it. And if purpose only lives in the marketing department, then you're in trouble. Purpose has got to run through the entire organization. And it's a galvanizing factor. And so the companies who realize that, Patagonia is always the poster child of doing good, but there are lots of other businesses who do it. But the challenge is to get it not as a vertical department, but as a horizontal mindset. Yeah. So traditionally, doing good was the domain of corporate affairs. That was one vertical, and it lived down the corridor somewhere. But now the doing good and the company purpose has got to be horizontally across all the pillars. Okay, so this is a quick answer. I can do two, Miguel, because the first, can I please say what the brain chemical that I mentioned earlier? It's oxytocin. It's basically the love drug. It's the thing that makes you want to collaborate with people. and it feels good. Okay, so that's oxytocin. Do you see a way to use the funds to enable this education inequality? Okay, and then quickly, just a factual, can I please repeat the 5 C's at the core of the thing? The 5 C's are critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, and compassion. Okay, there's a few more C's. And well, you can make it 6 C's. You can add in community if you want. All right, Miguel, let me pick one. Sure, so that'll take too long. What are the difference between a purpose-driven company and a socially responsible organization? It's not a clear-cut thing. Obviously, in some countries now, you have what's called a B Corp, so you have a B Corporation status or a B Corporation accreditation, which means that across your business, across your supply chain, across your manufacturing, in terms of your carbon footprint, whatever, you are conforming to certain things. And I think that is an accreditation that shows that you are a socially responsible company, that you are, and in most cases as a B Corp, there is that sense of purpose. But I think a lot of, the idea of corporate social responsibility was always, you could claim to be a corporately social responsible company by writing out checks at the end of the year. So giving back. So, and the whole thing with giving back, if you're giving something back, maybe you shouldn't have taken it in the first place. But the idea that you're, financially giving to somebody, and as I said earlier, often that's about the redemption of the giver rather than the empowerment of the receiver. But that doesn't mean that on a daily, you're not doing things that are aligned with the purpose. So the company purpose has got to be something that is deeply true for that corporation in terms of what it provides to its stakeholders. But interestingly, and I'll wrap up here, Miguel, I don't know if those of you have seen, towards the end of last year, the CEOs of the top 300 companies in the US signed what's called the Business Charter. And up until last year, since the 1970s, it was based on Milton Friedman's theory that the only responsibility that the company has is to its shareholders. So its only responsibility is to make money for its shareholders. And the 300 CEOs got together and rewrote it. And it's now written about a responsibility to its stakeholders. And its stakeholders are its staff, its community, and the planet. And the word shareholder, in a 300-word statement, the word shareholder only appears as word 265. So that, I think, and BlackRock, the biggest asset manager in the world, is now refusing to invest any of its funds into listed companies that do not have a clearly articulated sense of its own purpose. So it's happening, it's changing. Critical thinking, compassion, community, the other 3 C's, creativity, collaboration, and communication.
Ian, thank you so much. I need to connect to the next one and prepare everything like in 4 minutes. It's been absolutely great. So you got already a lot of people from South Africa. They were awake already. Europe is awake also. Okay. And thank you so much for joining, and hope to see you soon when we are able to travel.
Thanks, Miguel. And thanks again for doing this. I think it's so valuable to everybody right now.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.